Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's selection comes out as from Gustavo, Xaon, and Yet I Smile, symphonic death metal from Switzerland. Looking forward for your analysis. Cheers. Excellent. Let's dig into this. I'm seeing they only have 83 subscribers on YouTube, and this album possibly came out in 2022, maybe, but the band's been around for a while. They have music from at least 4 years ago. So let's get into it, see what they're bringing to the table today. Getting right into that, right from the start. Interesting. The verse is half as long, so we got into the orchestral part 8 bars early, and we also included clean vocals there. That's number 2. Going to mostly silence to come in for a big entrance. Interesting concept of dual movement. Yeah, really nice having these compositional alterations. We'll talk about it later. But lots of variety in how things are layered. Okay.
Dans ce déluge, cet océan de glace est la ruine
Oh,
d'une
yeah.
falaise qui pleure à la lumière d'un âge qui a jamais senti
So good.
une
Where did this come
erreur
from?
dans le sourire d'un miroir qui s'efface au-delà d'un
The dance that
tourment,
the vocals
d'un
and
grand
piano are doing,
savoir-vivre
separating and coming
par les
back.
flammes d'une rancœur trop oubliée et ce sourire dans sa noirceur illuminée. Quand tout
Yeah.
le monde viendra pour vous émerveiller. These strings are lasting louder. These strings are meant to suffer. And you're the reason why. And yet I smile. Oh, harder. This feeling's lost all glimmer. This light has gone now darker. And you're the reason why.
So good.
But yet I smile.
Yes. So Xaon, where have you been? And why don't you have more subscribers? I'm curious what the Spotify numbers are for this group. Um, because I mean, yeah, YouTube's always low, right? Spotify numbers are always higher than YouTube subscribers. How many? So we only have 1,800 views on this track, which still is going to be lower than Spotify, but that's still not a great indicator. Um, so like, they need more. They need more recognition, I think, because that was. Well, see, here's the thing. Let's start the analysis proper right here. Half of that was phenomenal, at least for my ears. Xaon, if you're watching this, I kind of mix subjective and objective ideas throughout here. I'm making this blatantly clear. The beginning wasn't for me personally. That doesn't mean it was bad. Um, but the first half of the track is firmly rooted in many of death metal's aspects I'm just not a big fan of. There is an overusage of, subjectively, overusage of pedal tone throughout. In fact, when we started off the track and we had all those open tone, maybe not open tone, the pedal tone ideas in the guitars and bass, my first thought was this isn't death metal, this is gent. And it's the things that I dislike most about gent. It's the melodic list gent. It's stuff like Meshuggah, which is hyper focused on the rhythmic aspects. And the textures of it all. And so that is, the foundation of it all, but it is a concept that we continue to see for a lot of this song throughout many of the metal aspects is that the guitars fill in that rhythmic textual role. There were two, maybe, guitar lines that I think actually could be qualified as melodic. There was a quick guitar solo which transitioned us between two ideas that I really enjoyed, but for the most part, the guitar work I found just a little bit dull for being as present in the mix as they were. Now, of course, the guitars aren't the only thing that's going on there, and there are melodic components through a lot of this in our symphony and our orchestral elements. but the guitars are kind of front and center production wise in the mix. And I feel like if you're coming at this from enjoying that type of music, then this is just going to be, the orchestra is going to be the icing on the cake, right? You already enjoy this kind of music, and then you're getting this other awesome stuff on top of it. This is phenomenal. But for me, I found that the basis of the composition in these sections was a little underwhelming based on my own personal tastes and actually detracted from the awesomeness that was being presented in the more melodic and harmonic components. And again, this is all subjective. This is just my what I enjoy out of music. Xaon, again, if you're watching, don't change anything. You guys are killing it with what you're doing. Um, Now, moving away from the guitars, though, and we look at the stuff that's sitting above it, there are some really great ideas up in here. We have these beautiful moving violin parts. We have the cello, I think. There are some brass elements in here as well that I really enjoy as embellishing ideas, but they quickly go away. And I was a little scared at this point because we were moving into the verse, and the verse was just the guitars with just that rhythmic component. And I was like, oh, this is going to be one of those songs where the orchestra comes around every once in a while for the big bombastic points, but for the most part, I'm going to just have this main metal aspect that personally I'm a little underwhelmed by. It's not my cup of tea, and I was pleasantly surprised about that. There were only a handful of bars before we began to have brass accenting the pedal note hit at the beginning of a phrase, and then we eventually had strings coming in and more brass, and began to fill out the higher end with layers across the verse, which I thought was really interesting. Usually, and I say usually not that it's the traditional way of doing it, just that it's what happens most often, is that a verse is static. And usually a chorus is going to be static or could build in some capacity, but it's not usually until we hit a bridge where we see more of a slow burn concept. But that's exactly what we had here. Right off the bat, we had our intro line to sort of introduce us to the overall vibe of the sound here, and then we went into a verse that brought everything down and slowly built back up to where we were, slow burn style. And this was just very cool. I think it worked exceptionally well, and even better was that when we got to verse 2, they realized that the trick wouldn't work again. And they're like, okay. So we quickly bring back in, we start off with just the metal instruments. We quickly bring back a couple of instruments, but we're already back to full rather quickly because we've actually cut the verse in half lengthwise. So we're actually dividing our time of just metal and of the orchestra, in half once again. So we have less time with just the metal band before we begin adding everything. And we add things quicker because we have less time to fill there. And the other variation that's added there is that we ditched the harsh vocals for clean in the last half of this verse too. So the ebb and flow of this song and the pacing and the control of everything is extremely tight and efficient. And I love the way that the band controls the emotions of the listener through this pacing. We start at a high, we bring it down, we slowly ramp it back up, we stay up for a little bit, we come down, and we decide to ramp back up immediately before having a variation. We sort of, instead of going straight up, we kind of come out to a side, which kind of makes it a three-dimensional graph. But it's like a parallel road. It's hard to do on an XY graph. But we explore the same thing we did in a different way. We condense it all. We hasten the pace and we kind of scrunch it down into a shorter amount of time while also exploring different ways of handling this exact same concept. And it's done so well. It took me on this little journey just within our first two verses, and the intro. And it was at this point that I was filled with anticipation. I felt the band was capable of doing something other than just gents with primarily chordal based string work above it. There were melodies, but a lot of it is this atmospheric chordal stuff, one note per bar. That's what the majority of the writing is for the orchestra stuff. Which, I mean, it absolutely works. You need foundations and you need melodies, and you typically need more foundation than melody, which creates the pyramid idea, which, I talk about this often enough. Um, so it absolutely works, but it's also something that I tend to go on rants about all too often is symphonic metal being just regular metal with chords given to strings and then calling it symphonic metal, which that's what a lot of symphonic metal tends to be. And it's not bad, it's just not my cup of tea. I'm trying to put that out there again. I don't want to upset anybody. This is a fantastic song, and I'm just trying to set the stage for where I was in the reaction at this point. But I had anticipation because I felt that there was um, possibility here. Seeing this expert control, it wasn't just that this was a band that this was the utmost capacity of their skills. This was just what they were electing to do at this moment. That's what I was seeing. And it wasn't my cup of tea, but I was beginning to appreciate what they might be going for, the specific vibe of it. And that's when we entered into, I guess, what we would call our bridge, which was kind of all over the place. We went through quite a few different ideas here, all of them still revolverating. I'm just going to leave it in there. That's a fun word. Around this core concept of the metal at the foundation and the strings and brass as the symphonic element above it. And we typically have that same type of pyramiding where we have the foundation of our metal band, a little bit of foundation in the orchestral elements, and then melodies over there. We do see some deviations from this. We do have a short guitar solo in here somewhere. Um, I don't know if I can call it a solo. I think it was just a lead melody line that happened to be given to a guitar, which was just so odd given everything the guitars had done previously. Um, and we introduced a little bit more of the clean singing here. But there was a shift, probably about 4 minutes into the track, around the halfway point, when I was blown away. And you guys know what I'm talking about. The swing section was so good. And see, this retroactively makes me appreciate all the more standard metal ideas. Because they may not be my cup of tea, but this is a band who knows what they want to do and executes the vision perfectly. The metal at the beginning of this track was done so in that way for a reason. They showed off in the bridge that they had chops to do more melodic playing from the guitars, to play faster if needed to, but they opted not to. It was a very conscious choice to write the guitars as they were in the first 3 minutes or so. It was a very conscious choice to write the foundation of the track. Write the buildup of the track, utilizing an excess of foundation almost in the beginning of the track. And they showcase pretty much the exact opposite of all of that here in this jazzy section. There's not so much emphasis on chords in this part. There is foundational aspects. We do have a chord progression, but it is not done through like five instruments all doing either pedal tones or chords or some other note in a chord and just changing notes once per bar. There are quite a few different embellishing lines, some ornamentation. There's multiple melodies going on here. There's the beautiful thing between the vocals and the piano in which they divert and do counterpoint and sort of dance around each other's ideas and then come back together and unify and sing and play the exact same thing before distancing out again. And it's almost like a dance where two people come together and they have to check their leg work and make sure, that they're perfectly dancing around each other. And then, maybe one spins out from the other, and then they have little solo works before coming back together and doing a unified dance again, and then separating ways and doing their own solo dances. Um, and that's exactly what this felt like. It was a dance, and it was gorgeous. And, this was just the lead element. We have a beautiful bass line going on at the bottom. The violin and the guitars are doing these gorgeous atmospheric, textural elements that are going on. We have some ornamentation going on, and it is just this multifaceted um, aspect of the song where it's not about this full force display of like 4 to 5 instruments all doing a chord to make this really big sound. It's about a bunch of little sounds filling up the little bit of space that they can, and it does sound sparser comparatively, but again, this must have been a very intentional choice to create this contrast because it's contrasted on every other way. You could almost say that the pyramid is inverted here, where the melodic aspects are the most numerous, and then the ornamental aspects are more numerous, and then we have the foundational elements. Our chordal work is the least important, the least mentioned. I believe it's just the bass and guitar that are showcasing chordal ideas. Um, and the bass is only doing it through. I can't remember what the bass was doing here. Hmm. Maybe the bass. Well, I'm just gonna have to erase that because I can't remember what the bass is doing. The guitar was definitely working on chordal ideas though, and um, and it just completely flips the script into moving it from something that feels like this total force, a unified total force, to something that feels very individual and bouncy and light. And it does so just by inverting pretty much every single compositional direction that we were in. Um, and you don't just do that by accident. I mean, maybe you arrive at that by accident. You write your metal aspect, and you're like, oh, from here, let's, the lyrics dictate something jazzy. I don't know how they get to it. And then they start writing it, and they're like, oh, we're on to something. You start building off that, and then now you've got something totally different from where we were. But I don't think you can just stumble into that and just end up there and be like, oh, well, I guess we did that. Once you start writing something jazzy, I mean, jazz is fairly tonally opposite from metal, anyways. Just deciding to move into that direction on its own is already an intentional shift. So yeah, I mean, this whole song just shows me that. Well, actually, even just these two sections show me that this is a band that has a lot of control over their composition, knows exactly how they want to go and where they want to take it and how to get there. But I think if the song had just stopped here, I wouldn't come to that conclusion directly. It's actually where we go next that really solidifies this for me and makes me want to check out more of the band because I believe so dearly that they are masters of their composition, and that's our outro. You see, the outro perfectly marries these two completely opposite sides. I honestly don't know how they did it. They don't include the jazziness, but they include a lot of the compositional elements in here. We do have a slow build in our final 2 minutes of the song, minute and a half of the song, where we continue to cycle the same 16 beats, give or take. So 4 bars. Yeah, that sounds about right. Cycle the same 4 bars over and over and over and over, but slowly adding more elements. And we start off with something a bit sparser, clean vocals. The drums are less frequently played. Keep that in mind. Um, We do have the guitars. I think we have one or two of the orchestral instruments, but we slowly add more. Um, and then we begin to add in elements that take us from this sparse individual element into a larger unified one. We add bigger guitar sounds. We add more of the orchestration. We have more instruments. We include more chordal ideas to further fill out the foundational aspects while also adding more melodic ideas to fill out more of that. A lot of the melodic ideas sit on top, helping to create the upright triangle like we had at the beginning. Slowly inverts from the upside down triangle we had at the beginning of the slow burn. So it's actually a really nice smooth flipping of that. And then, of course, we add the harsh vocals on top of the cleans, and the harshes get even more harsh. I think there's multi-layered on the cleans too to give it a choir effect, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the harshes become more heartbreaking. There's something really emotional. It was pulling at my heartstrings. Um, just with the pure delivery of it. And of course the music is swelling around it, and the that vocal is getting drowned and drowned out and drowned out. And I think the lyric at that time is yet I smile, or maybe it was just I smile. I think I picked that up, but I'm not sure. And like despite all this darkness, he's saying, I still put on the smile, but he's being overwhelmed by it even while screaming. The loudest this person can make his vocals, and is still being overwhelmed. Um, and it's just masterfully built up from this lower point of joy, of bounciness, of lightness, of almost having all the worries removed from their shoulders, the weight off their shoulders. That's what the jazzy section says to me, and it slowly gets stacked back up until it's overwhelming. All of that swingy bounciness is reverted back into a rigid accent pattern and then stacked on top of, and it's just, yeah. Now, unfortunately, I don't know if it's because they're a smaller band. Um, I couldn't find any lyrics. I checked a few sites, Genius included. I checked Bandcamp. Sometimes bands put their lyrics on the individual song pages. Um, but I can't break. I want to get into the lyrics. Like usually I'll be listening to a song. I'm like, I picked up on some of the lyrics. Yeah, it works, right? Maybe I'm like, the lyrics probably don't have much to do with the music. We'll dive into them anyways. And then yeah, okay. There's not much of a connection there. This is just a really good metal song with some neat lyrics on it. But this one I'm like, I need to know what their story is. I felt a story throughout this. I want to know what their intentions are, and I don't have that opportunity right now, which is just a little disheartening. But I think it's really interesting to stick around with music. And I say that as somebody who I have self-confessed previously that I will turn off an album if I'm not enjoying it. And I do scrub through songs occasionally as well. As much as I promote checking out art and approaching it on its own terms, I do appreciate the fact that we only have so much time on this planet. It needs to be spent wisely. If you're not enjoying something, you shouldn't have to feel compelled to finish it. But I'm going to sort of go in the opposite of that direction and state right here that I'm really glad I stuck around with this. The first half of this track did not work for me very well. It was fine, but nothing I would really have I've listened to on my own. But the last half of it completely recontextualizes the first half and actually makes me want to check out more of their work, and it completely puts the track in a new perspective. So I don't know. It's a tough call when you're listening to something you don't like. Do you continue? Do you not continue? There's no easy answer, but at least for this track, I'm happy I stuck around for the last 3 minutes of it. Those are my thoughts on Xaon's And Yet I Smile. What did you think? Did you enjoy it? anything that stood out to you, or maybe that you'd like to correct me on or add on to what I stated, let me know down in the comments. Above that, in the description box, is a link to Linktree. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, and a link to the Discord server. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, with the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.